which then leads us into, well, what is apostolicity? And one thing that I want to stress is that it is not restricted to just material succession.
Yes. In other words, the faith. Yeah. Like, you got to have the faith too. It's not just...
You have to have the faith. So Sam is basically reducing his apostolic Christianity to really just be those ancient churches that have material succession. And just let's completely ignore what exactly the details are of their theology and the fact that they've been excommunicated. That doesn't matter. It's just that, is there some kind of material succession? Oh, they're apostolic. Well, material succession is necessary, but it's not the sole grounds that determines apostolicity. You have to preserve the faith. That is an key marker for apostolicity, just as much as material succession.
Can I add on that real quick?
Yeah,
I don't want to interrupt your flow, but I know what it's like to think that way because I was a Roman Catholic. I went from Calvinism to Catholicism, much like many of the people out there like Sam have. And one thing that I didn't understand until I got interested in Orthodoxy was the Orthodox view is not identical to the Roman Catholic view that there's all this validity of apostolic succession even outside of the church. And when you understand this point that, and it was actually St. Athanasius's letters that convinced me of this position, because when I first heard this, I thought it was Donatus, but then I realized, no, actually it doesn't make any sense to say that there is a succession of the apostles that is heretical. That doesn't make any sense. But that's what you have to say if you're an ex operato Roman Catholic Augustinian view here. And the Orthodox view is that no, if you lose the faith, the other mechanical stuff also doesn't matter. Now, the church can make determinations about how you're received into the church. That's a different issue. But you're not still the church without the faith. In other words, you would have to be saying that you can have heretical apostolic succession, and that makes no sense.
Exactly. It makes absolutely no sense. And that's actually going to lead into the example that I'm going to give. And this is directly tied to the Church of the East. And so if you're talking about apostolicity with regards to material succession and correct dogma, correct expression of the faith, so let's take Nestorius as the example. So by ecumenical council, by the Third Ecumenical Council, Nestorius was deposed, meaning that he was completely stripped of clerical status. He's not a bishop anymore. He has no clerical status whatsoever. And once that happened, there is no apostolicity to him. Okay, he is not a valid cleric. He cannot transmit apostolicity because apostolicity has to go through the clerical establishment. So any church that follows Nestorius or considers him a saint or venerates him or gives him a clerical status loses its apostolicity. Okay, this is a very important point that we see in the Fifth Ecumenical Council. Okay, you look at, I think it's Canon 11 and 12 of the 8th session of the Fifth Ecumenical Council. I made a community post on it. So why is this important? Because the Ecumenical Council, which apparently if Sam is part of the Roman Catholic Church, he has to hold to this Ecumenical Council. It clearly states you must anathematize Theodore of Mopsuestia and Nestorius. These are saints and they're venerated within the Church of the East. And if you do not anathematize them, then you yourself are also anathema. So that means you take yourself out of apostolicity, just the way the councils had deemed Nestorius to no longer hold apostolic succession. So if you don't anathematize him, you are anathema, meaning you're no longer apostolic. That's what the argument is. And it's that simple. And so you cannot argue for this apostolic church when you actually, if you're going to be a Roman Catholic and hold to these councils and these canons, and yet you're going to tell us that the church that doesn't anathematize these people are apostolic?
This is huge. Now, I want to back that up by pointing out that you have to understand, too, that Albrecht, Akin, voice of reason, and I don't know if Albrecht has shifted his position on this or what, but they have all, and Sam as well, basically said in various ways and phrases, Ephesus actually got it wrong when they condemned Nestorius because, quote, Nestorius wasn't a Nestorian. Now, this is so stupid because it shows no familiarity with the actual documents of Ephesus, because if you read the anathemas are actually directed at Nestorius. In other words, this would mean that all the anathemas of Ephesus are also wrong because they're misattributing a position that Nestorius claims to have. And it would mean that Nestorius was not defrocked and did not lose his apostolicity. But that's literally, and I've played this clip many times, Voice of Reason, Akin, all these guys say that, no, Nestorius wasn't a Nestorian. And it's not just a denial of Ephesus, and it's fundamental to Ephesus that it's Nestorius that's right. You have to believe that Cyril correctly understood Nestorius' position as a dual subject Christology. Yeah. So to say that Nestorius wasn't a Nestorian means that Ephesus was theologically wrong as well.
Yeah, and to actually add to that point, I think it's in Pope Celestine's letter to Nestorius. I read it, a part of it way back when I was doing my streams on the Church of the East, but I think it's Pope Celestine's letter. He even says, he's like explicitly saying, he's like, there's no room for misunderstanding what you believe, Nestorius, because we have your writings in your own hand. So it's like, it's not like a game of telephone or a misrepresentation. They had Nestorius's own writings that they were consulting and reading and making their judgments on. So there's that point. The other point was there was the double apostolicity charge against Nestorius, meaning that it was both the See of Rome and the See of Alexandria that found fault with Nestorius. So it's not just a misreading of him. It is like the sees themselves are saying, Nestorius, you are wrong. And in the letter, it basically says that Nestorius must confess the faith as Saint Cyril lays it out.
Yes, and by extension, the Fifth Council would also be wrong.
Exactly. So these people who are trying to say the ecumenical councils got it wrong, I think they are just a little bit ignorant of their theology and the councils.
Well, let me read from your post. This is 2 weeks ago. Shamoun will not condemn the Nestorian Church of the East, which venerates Theodore of Mopsuestia and Nestorius. Instead, Sam preaches that the Nestorian Assyrian Church of the East has a valid apostolic succession and thus is a vehicle of salvation. However, the Fifth Ecumenical Council, which is the reinterpretation of Chalcedon in a Cyrillian way, if we understand that, then we understand that it's just as important as Ephesus and Chalcedon. It reads, quote, the Fifth Ecumenical Council states in the canons of the 8th session, if anyone does not anathematize Nestorius, let him be anathema. If anyone defends the impious Theodore of Mopsuestia and he does not anathematize him, let him be anathema. And that's from Richard Price, and that's pages 123 to 25 of Constantinople 553.
Yeah, the second volume specifically. So I've got it like right here, right there. Pick it up, go and read it. Sam, if you are serious about wanting to learn,
well, in my experience, all of these Roman Catholic apologists, they don't care. They don't care what Ephesus says. They don't care what the Fifth Council reaffirms. They just hand wave it. I don't care.
Hand wave it. Okay, well, if you want to hand wave it, then you have a church without ecumenical councils. I mean,
Well, it's Protestant, isn't it?
Exactly. So based on that argument, that argument alone demonstrates that Sam's whole apostolic Christianity is it's nonsensical and it's heretical, because to preach a church that the ecumenical as canonical, that an ecumenical council has said cannot be canonical, that is heresy. That is outright heresy. You are preaching heresy at this point. Okay?